beyond I am this, what Buddha found when he took apart the self. What are you? Not philosophically, practically. If I asked you to point to yourself, where would you point? Your chest, your head, your body. And if I said, no, point to the thing that is you, what would you actually be pointing at? 2,500 years ago, in a deer park outside Varanasi, the Buddha answered that question. And his answer was so precise, so methodical, so strange, that 5 men who heard it became fully liberated. Not inspired, not moved, done, free from suffering permanently in a single sitting. Here is what makes that extraordinary. 5 days earlier, those same 5 monks had heard the Buddha's first sermon, the famous teaching on the 4 Noble Truths. That sermon produced one stream enterer, one man who glimpsed the truth, remarkable but partial. The second sermon, 5 days later, same monks, same deer park, produced 5 arahants, SN 22.59, 5 men who finished the path entirely. Whatever the Buddha said in that second teaching was not a refinement. It was the thing itself. And what he said was this. He took apart the thing they called me, piece by piece, 5 pieces to be exact, and he showed them, with an argument so tight, it still holds 25 centuries later, that none of those pieces deserved the name. Tonight, we are going to hear that argument. We are going to walk through each of the 5 pieces, not as a list, but as a way of looking at your own experience right now, this evening, sitting where you are sitting. And by the end, you may not be liberated. That would be a strange promise for a video to make. But something will have shifted. The thing you call me will feel a little less solid, a little more like a process than a thing. And that shift, that loosening of grip, is where everything begins. Let us go to the deer park. Section 1. The argument that freed them. The scene is deceptively simple. It is 5 days after the Buddha's first sermon. The same 5 monks are sitting with him in the same grove at Isipatana. Khandhas, the one who became a stream enterer during the first teaching, is among them. They have had 5 days to absorb the 4 Noble Truths. They know suffering exists, that craving causes it, that it can end, and that a path leads to its ending. They have the diagnosis. Now the Buddha gives them something else. Not a new diagnosis, an instrument, a way of looking at their own experience so closely that the thing generating suffering can be seen directly. He begins with form, rupa, the body, the physical, SN 22.59. And his argument is not what you might expect. He does not say the body is an illusion. He does not say you are not your body. He says something far more surgical than that. He asks a question. If form was self, form would not lead to affliction. It would be possible to say of form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. SN 22.59. Sit with that for a moment. The argument is not metaphysical, it is practical. If this body were truly yours, if it were the thing you call me, then you could control it. You could say, let my back not ache, let my knees not stiffen, let this body not age. But you cannot say that. You have been saying it in one form or another your entire life, and the body has never once obeyed. It ages on its own schedule. It gets sick without your permission. It is doing things right now, digesting, circulating, replacing cells that you did not ask it to do and could not stop if you tried. The Buddha's first move is not philosophy. It is observation. You do not control this. Therefore, it is not you. Not because the body is unreal. He never says that. Because calling it mine is a misidentification. You are claiming ownership of something that does not answer to the owner. Then comes the second step, the impermanence chain. The Buddha asks, is form permanent or impermanent? The monks answer, impermanent, Lord. And is what is impermanent stressful or pleasurable? Stressful, Lord. And is it fitting to regard what is impermanent, stressful, and subject to change as, this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am? No, Lord. SN 22.59. The logic is clean enough that you can follow it without any Buddhist training at all. Anything that changes constantly cannot be a stable you. Anything unstable is inherently stressful to cling to. And anything that is both impermanent and stressful is a strange candidate for your identity. You would not look at a river and say, that particular arrangement of water is me. The body is doing exactly what the river does, flowing, changing, never the same twice. And yet you point at it and say mine. The third step is the conclusion. And the Buddha delivers it with a specificity that reveals just how precisely he has thought this through. He does not say, so don't identify with it. He says, whatever form there is, past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all forms should be seen with right understanding as it actually is. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. SN 22.59. 11 categories. Past, future, present. Inside your skin, outside your skin. Coarse, refined, low, high, distant, near. He's closing every loophole. You cannot say, well, this body isn't me, but maybe the body I had at 20 was. You cannot say, my gross physical body isn't me, but perhaps some subtle physical form is. Every form, everywhere, everywhen, not mine, not self, not what I am. And here is where the teaching becomes something different from what most people think Buddhism says. The Buddha is not saying you do not exist. He is not saying there is no person sitting in that grove, no person sitting where you are right now. He is saying something more precise and more useful. None of these processes deserve to be called self. The body is real. It hurts, it ages, it breathes. But it is not you in the way you instinctively feel it is. It is a process you are entangled with, not a possession you own. And as long as you treat it as a possession, as long as you say mine, you will suffer every time it does something you did not authorize, which is always. In our first video, we met the 5 aggregates briefly. 5 ways Buddhism maps what Western psychology calls ego. Now we go inside, because the Buddha did not stop at form. He repeated this exact 3-step argument, the control test, the impermanence chain, the 11-fold conclusion, for each of the remaining 4 processes: feeling, perception, mental fabrications, consciousness. 5 times the same relentless logic. 5 times the same conclusion. Not mine, not self, not what I am. And at the end of the 5th repetition, something happened that had never happened before in the history of this teaching. The text says, the minds of the group of 5 monks, through lack of clinging, were released from the effluence, SN 22.59, all 5, full arahantship, the path completed. The first sermon diagnosed the disease. The second showed them that the patient, the one they thought was sick, was not who they thought it was, but to understand why that argument worked, why it freed 5 people permanently, and why it might loosen something in you. We need to do what the Buddha did. We need to look at each of the 5 processes, one at a time, and see what we find when we look closely enough. The first one is the most familiar, The last one is the most dangerous. Section 2. 5 processes. 1 morning. Rupa. Form. The Pali word rupa is usually translated as form or body, but the Buddha defined it through a verb, not a noun. In the Kajanya Sutta, he says, it is afflicted, rupati. Thus it is called form. S. N. 22.79. That verb, rupati, means to be pushed around, disturbed, deformed by contact. Form is not a thing. It is whatever can be acted upon. The 4 great elements, earth, water, fire, wind, and everything derived from them. Solidity, fluidity, temperature, motion. Your body, yes, but also the chair beneath you, the air in your lungs, the sound hitting your eardrums right now. Anything physical, anything that can be pushed. This matters because the most common mistranslation of rupa is simply body, as though the first aggregate is about your body specifically. It is not. It is about the entire domain of the physical. The Buddha is not just saying your body isn't you. He is saying the physical world is not a suitable candidate for self, which is a much larger claim. And to see what he means, the Buddha offers an image. In the Phenapindupama Sutta, he says, suppose a man were to see a large glob of foam being carried along by the Ganges. He would see it, examine it, and find it to be void, hollow, without substance. In the same way, whatever form there is, past, future, or present, a monk sees it, examines it, and finds it void, hollow, without substance. S. N. 22.95. A glob of foam on a river. It looks solid from the bank. It has shape, volume, presence. But reach into it, and there is nothing to hold. It is structure without substance, convincing from a distance, empty up close. Think of cotton candy. An enormous cloud of it, pink, impressive, taking up space. Put it on your tongue and it vanishes. That is rupa. Not because the body is fake, because what feels solid and permanent is neither. You felt this when you woke up this morning, before you opened your eyes. The heaviness in your limbs, the weight of the blanket, the temperature of the room pressing against your skin. That is rupa, not your body. The entire physical field of that moment, the mattress pushing back against you, the air moving into your chest, the dull ache in your lower back that was not there yesterday. All of it, rupati, being pushed, pressing, in flux. None of it waiting for your permission. But here is the thing about form. It is the easiest aggregate to understand and the least interesting, because the real action is not in the body. It is in what happens next. Vedana, feeling. The alarm goes off. A sound hits your ear, and before you have a single thought about it, before you know what time it is, before you remember what day it is, before the word alarm even forms, something has already happened. The sound has been tagged. Unpleasant. Not by you, not by a decision, by a process so fast and so automatic that you have never once caught it in the act. That tag, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, is Vedana, and it is arguably the most misunderstood word in all of Buddhism. The Buddha defines it simply. It feels, thus it is called feeling. S. N. 22.79. 3 types: pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling. That is all. Not emotion, not mood, not I feel angry or I feel grateful. Those are complex mental events involving stories, memories, self-concepts. They belong to the 4th aggregate. Vedana is before all of that. It is the bare sensation of valence. The moment experience gets stamped with a plus, a minus, or a 0. Jnanaponika thera, one of the great German Sri Lankan scholar monks of the 20th century, was precise about this. Vedana is bare sensation noted as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and should not be confused with emotion in the Western psychological usage. When you stub your toe, the sharp flash of pain before you curse, that is Vedana. The cursing is something else entirely. Why does this matter? Because Vedana is where craving hooks in. This is the link that connects tonight's video to an earlier one. In the teaching on craving, tanha, the Buddha traces the chain of dependent origination and identifies the critical junction. With feeling as condition, craving arises. SN 12.1. Pleasant feeling arises, leads to the mind reaches for more. Unpleasant feeling arises, leads to the mind pushes it away. Neutral feeling arises, leads to the mind gets bored and goes looking for stimulation. Every single movement of craving, every grab, every push, every restless surge is triggered by Vedana, not by the event, not by the situation, by the tag. This is why the Buddha separated feeling from emotion. If you confuse the two, you try to fix your emotions, which is like trying to fix the flood by mopping the floor. If you see Vedana clearly, if you catch the tag as it happens, you are standing at the source of the river, before the craving, before the story, before the second arrow. The simile the Buddha uses for Vedana. Suppose that in the autumn, when it is raining and big drops of water are falling, a water bubble appears and disappears on the water. A monk sees it, examines it, and finds it void, hollow, without substance. SN 22.95. A water bubble in the rain. It exists, you can see it, but try to collect it in a jar. By the time your hand arrives, it has already burst. Another one appears, and another. Each one real, each one gone before you can hold it. Think of champagne fizz. The bubbles rise, catch the light, pop. You cannot accumulate them. You cannot say, that bubble, that is me. And yet, this is the strange part. This vanishing, uncollectible process is the precise point where your entire emotional life is generated. Every craving you have ever felt began with a bubble you never noticed. Sanya, perception now. You have opened your eyes. The alarm is still sounding, and something happens that feels so natural you have never questioned it. You recognize things. That shape is a phone. That rectangle is a window. That blur is a face. The room assembles itself instantly, without effort. Labels arrive. Pillow, wall, morning, as though the world came pre-labeled and you are simply reading the tags. That labeling, that instant automatic recognition, is sanya. The Buddha defines it with unexpected precision. It perceives blue, yellow, red, white. Thus it is called perception. SN 22.79. Sanya is the mind's labeling function. It takes the raw data of experience, form, sound, sensation, and stamps it with a category. This is blue. This is my bedroom. This is Tuesday. The common mistranslation is cognition, which is far too broad. Sanya is not thinking. It is the moment before thinking, when experience is sorted into bins. The bins feel accurate. They feel like they are showing you what is really there. But the Buddha warns, sanya is also the site of vipallasa, perceptual distortion. AN 4.49. We perceive the impermanent as permanent, the stressful as pleasurable, the not-self as self. The labels feel reliable, they are not. The simile. Suppose that in the last month of the hot season, at midday, a mirage shimmers. A monk sees it, examines it, and finds it void, hollow, without substance. SN 22.95. A mirage. You are driving on a highway in July. Ahead of you, a sheet of water on the road. Unmistakable. You can see it. You drive toward it. It is always the same distance ahead. You never arrive. The road is dry. It was always dry. But the perception was flawless. Your visual system was not broken. It was doing exactly what it does, constructing a plausible label from insufficient data. And it was wrong. This is sanya, not illusion in the sense that nothing is there. Illusion in the sense that what is there is not what the label says it is. The label permanent is a mirage. The label mine is a mirage. The label self is, the Buddha would say, the most convincing mirage of all. And if feeling is where craving hooks in, perception is where the hook is baited. The label pleasant makes you reach. The label unpleasant makes you flinch. Correct the labels and the craving has nothing to grip. But perception only labels. It does not build. What builds? What constructs the entire architecture of your experience moment to moment is something far stranger, sankhara, fabrications. This is the aggregate where most people's eyes glaze over. It is the broadest, the most abstract, and the one that translators fight about most. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as volitional formations. Other translators use mental formations. Thanissaro Bhikkhu uses fabrications. And for once, his unusual translation choice is the most revealing. The Buddha defines sankhara with a sentence that sounds like a riddle. They fabricate the fabricated. Thus they are called fabrications. S. N. 22.79. Read that again. Fabrications fabricate the fabricated. The process creates its own products, and then uses those products to create more of itself. It is self-referential. It builds, and what it builds becomes the raw material for more building. What does this mean in practice? 3 types. MN 44. Bodily fabrication, your breathing. Verbal fabrication, directed thought and evaluation, the inner voice that plans and narrates. Mental fabrication, perception and feeling themselves. That last one is the strange part. Sankhara shapes the other aggregates. Your fabrications influence what you perceive, sanya, and how you feel, vedana. The construction crew is also building the floor it stands on. This morning, you are stuck in traffic. A car cuts in front of you, vedana. A flash of unpleasant feeling. Sanya labels the event, that driver, aggressive, unfair. But what happens next is sankhara, the intention to honk, the mental rehearsal of what you would say, the narrative that assembles itself. People like that always happens to me, this whole commute. None of this is in the event. The event was a car changing lanes. Sankhara built a world around it, a world with villains, victims, and a storyline that will echo through your morning. And it did this automatically. You did not decide to fabricate that narrative. The fabrications fabricated themselves. This is why the Buddha called them the most pervasive aggregate, because they are running constantly, constructing your experience, and you almost never catch them at it. The simile. Suppose a man needing heartwood, looking for heartwood, were to take a sharp axe and enter a forest. There he would see the trunk of a large banana tree, straight, young, without fruit bud sheaths. He would cut it at the root, cut off the crown, and unroll the trunk. As he unrolled it, he would not find even sapwood, let alone heartwood. SLN 22.95. A banana tree trunk. You peel the outer layer, there is another layer. Peel that, another. You keep expecting to find the solid core, the heartwood, the thing at the center. You never do. Layers all the way down, structure without center, process without product. Think of peeling an onion. You pull off one skin, expecting to reach the pit. There is no pit. There is only more onion. And when you have peeled every layer, your hands are empty, and your eyes are watering. That is sankhara. Not because it is not real. You are holding actual onion skin. You are crying actual tears. But because the center you were looking for was never there. What was there was the peeling. Sankhara is the mind's construction crew, and its most impressive construction is the one you are least likely to notice. The feeling of being a someone who is doing the constructing. That feeling too is fabricated. Now, the last aggregate. And this one is where people get into the most trouble. Vijnana, consciousness. You are awake. The room is assembled. You know you are in your bedroom. You know the alarm went off. You know you are running late. And there is a quality to all of this, a quality of knowing. Not knowing in the sense of having information. Knowing in the sense that experience is happening to someone. There is something it is like to be you right now. The lights are on. That quality, the bare fact that experience is being cognized, is vijnana. And the Buddha was ruthlessly specific about it. It cognizes sour, bitter, pungent, sweet, sharp, mild, salty, not salty. Thus it is called consciousness, SN 22.79, not consciousness, in the way a Western philosopher might use the word. Some unified field of awareness, watching everything from above. The Buddha identifies 6 types of consciousness. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. Each one arises at the point of contact between a sense organ and its object. Eye meets color. Eye consciousness arises. Ear meets sound. Ear consciousness arises. There is no master consciousness directing traffic. There are 6 streams, each arising from its own conditions, each ceasing when those conditions change. This morning, the moment the alarm sounded, ear consciousness arose. When you opened your eyes, eye consciousness arose. When you felt the heaviness in your limbs, body consciousness arose. Each moment of knowing was fresh, arising at that contact point, not carried over from a storehouse of awareness that was waiting in the background. This is the most important mistranslation warning in all 5 aggregates. Vijnana is not a soul. It is not pure awareness. It is not a universal consciousness that connects all beings. It is not the thing that survives death and moves to another body like a passenger moving between trains. It is conditioned. It arises from specific causes and ceases when those causes change. The fire analogy the Buddha uses, and we will return to this shortly, makes the point unforgettably. A fire-burning wood is a wood fire. A fire-burning grass is a grass fire. There is no fire in itself that moves from one fuel to another, and there is no consciousness in itself that moves from one set of conditions to another. The simile. Suppose a magician or a magician's apprentice were to perform a magic trick at the crossroads. A monk sees it, examines it, and finds it void, hollow, without substance. SN 22.95. A magic show at the crossroads. The trick is happening. You see the woman sawn in half, see the coin vanish. Your experience is real, the gasp, the wonder, the moment of believing. But what you are experiencing is constructed. The magician did not actually do what your consciousness tells you he did. The knowing itself was genuine. What it told you about reality was not. Think of a VR headset. You put it on. Your heart races on a cliff edge. Your stomach drops in a virtual elevator. The experience is real. Take the headset off, and you are in your living room. The knowing was happening. What it was knowing was a fabrication. And this is vijnana, not a window onto reality. A magic trick you are watching from inside. Convincing, vivid, undeniably present. and constructed from conditions you did not choose and cannot fully control. The closing verse of the Foam Sutta draws all five together, and the Buddha's tone shifts. It is no longer analytical, it is urgent. However you observe them, however you examine them, they are empty, void, to anyone who sees them appropriately. A monk should view the aggregates as if his head were on fire. SN 22.95. As if his head were on fire. This is not a detached philosophical observation. This is samvega, the urgency we met earlier in this channel. The five aggregates are not academic categories. They are the architecture of your prison. And the instruction, the word yoniso upaparikati, wisely examine, which appears 19 times in this single sutta, is not study these in a library. It is look at these in your own experience right now as though your life depends on it. Because the Buddha would say, it does, now. There is a reason I saved the most dangerous aggregate for last. Not because consciousness is the hardest to understand, though it is, but because consciousness is where the most common mistake lives. And the Buddha was so alarmed when he heard this mistake that he did something he almost never did. He lost his composure. Section 3. The Consciousness Trap. A monk named Sati had been telling people something that sounded reasonable. It sounded, in fact, like what most people assume Buddhism teaches. He was saying, it is this same consciousness that runs and wanders through the round of rebirths, not another MN38. In other words, consciousness is the thing that moves from life to life. The body dies, but consciousness continues. It is the passenger, the soul by another name. Other monks heard this and tried to correct him. Sati would not budge, so they brought him to the Buddha. The Buddha asked, Sati, is it true that this pernicious view has arisen in you? And Sati doubled down. Exactly so, Lord. As I understand the teaching, it is this same consciousness that runs and wanders, not another. What happened next is unlike almost anything else in the Pali Canon. The Buddha called him Moggapurisa, worthless man, MN38. And he did not say it once. He said it repeatedly. This is the same teacher whose typical mode is infinite patience, who spent 45 years calmly re-explaining the same truths to anyone who asked. And here he is, visibly appalled. Not because Sati is stupid, but because Sati's mistake is exactly the kind that looks like understanding while leading in the opposite direction. Worthless man, to whom have you ever heard me teach the Dhamma in that way? Haven't I stated in many ways that consciousness arises from conditions? Without a condition, there is no arising of consciousness. MN38. Then the Buddha gives the image that settles it. Fire. A fire-burning wood is called a wood fire. A fire-burning grass is called a grass fire. A fire-burning cow dung is called a cow dung fire. Each fire is real, hot, bright, capable of burning you. But there is no fire in itself that exists independently of its fuel and simply moves from wood to grass to dung. The fire does not travel. When the wood is consumed and the grass catches, what arises is a new fire, conditioned by new fuel. It is not the old fire reborn. It is a new event, caused by new conditions. Consciousness works the same way. When the eye meets a visible form, eye consciousness arises, conditioned by the eye and the form. When the ear meets a sound, ear consciousness arises, conditioned by the ear and the sound. Each moment of consciousness is a fresh arising, dependent on its conditions, ceasing when those conditions change. There is no consciousness in itself hovering behind the scenes, waiting to jump from one set of conditions to the next. No passenger, no soul, no ghost in the machine. This is why the Buddha reacted so strongly. Sati's mistake was not a small doctrinal error. It was the error, the one that smuggles the self back in through the most sophisticated door available. You can let go of identifying with the body. You can let go of identifying with feelings, perceptions, even mental fabrications. But if you quietly transfer your sense of me to consciousness, if you think, I am not my body, I am not my thoughts, I am the awareness behind all of that, you have done something very clever and very dangerous. You have abandoned 4 aggregates and moved into the 5th. You have not seen through the self. You have given it a penthouse suite. If you have encountered Western meditation culture, you have almost certainly heard some version of Sati's error dressed in modern clothing. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness of your thoughts. Consciousness is the one thing that doesn't change. Pure awareness is your true nature. These statements feel profound. They feel liberating. And the Buddha, if MN38 is any guide, would have called them exactly the mistake he was trying to correct. Not because awareness is unreal. You are aware right now. That is not in question. But because calling awareness the real you is the same move the mind makes with every other aggregate, grasping at a process, calling it mine, and building an identity on top of something that is conditioned, impermanent, and not under your control. The VR headset is not more you than the images it displays. It is part of the same system, and the whole system arises from conditions you did not author. The fire analogy does one more thing, something subtle enough that it is easy to miss. It does not say consciousness is an illusion. A grass fire is a real fire. It will really burn you. Consciousness is real. It really knows. It really cognizes sour and bitter and sweet. What the analogy denies is continuity. The wood fire and the grass fire are not the same fire. And the consciousness that arose when you opened your eyes this morning, and the consciousness arising right now as you listen to these words, they are not the same consciousness. They are different events, conditioned by different contacts, connected by sequence, but not by identity. This is harder to feel than to understand. You can nod at the logic and still feel viscerally that there is a you who has been here all along, watching, knowing, persisting from moment to moment. The Buddha knew that. He did not expect the feeling to vanish just because the argument was airtight. That feeling, that stubborn preconceptual sense of I am, has its own name, its own sutta, and its own teaching. And it is where we go next. Because there was a monk who understood everything we have discussed tonight. The 5 aggregates, the 3-step argument, the control test, the impermanence chain, the fire analogy. Understood it completely, and still could not shake the feeling that he existed. And what happened to him is the most honest thing in the entire Pali Canon. Section 4. The Chariot and the Scent. Before we meet that monk, there is a woman who deserves to be heard first. Her name is Vajira, and she is a nun, a bhikkhuna. And the Pali Canon records her saying something so precise that a king's advisor would quote it centuries later and get all the credit. Vajira is meditating when Mara, the tempter, the voice of doubt, approaches and asks, by whom was this being created? Where is the maker of this being? Where has this being arisen? Where does this being cease? SN 510. It is the oldest question in religion. Who made you? Where do you come from? What are you? Vajira does not flinch. She answers, why do you assume a being? Mara, is that your view? This is a heap of fabrications. Here, no being is found. Just as, with an assemblage of parts, the word chariot is used, so too, when the aggregates are present, the convention, a being is used, S in 510, a chariot. You see it on the road, wheels, axle, frame, reins, seat. You call it chariot, but take the wheels off. Remove the axle, disassemble the frame, lay every part on the ground in front of you. Where is the chariot? Point to it. You cannot, because chariot was never a thing. It was a word for an arrangement, a convention applied to parts in a particular configuration. The parts are real. The arrangement is real. But the chariot, as something over and above the parts, was never there. And you, the one sitting here, the one with a name, a history, a sense of being someone, you are the chariot. 5 aggregates in a particular configuration. Form, feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness. Each one real, each one functioning, each one doing exactly what it does. But the self that you assume is riding them, owning them, directing them. That is the word chariot, applied to an assemblage of parts. The convention is useful. You need it to navigate the world. You need a name, a pronoun, a sense of where your body ends and the furniture begins. But useful is not the same as true. And mistaking the convention for a self is, Vajira would say, Mara's view, the tempter's trick. Bhikkhu Bodhi called this verse a stunning exposition of not self. And he is right. But what most people know is not Vajira's verse. What most people know is the Milinda Panya, a post-canonical text composed centuries later, in which a monk named Nagasena uses the chariot analogy in an extended dialogue with the Greek-influenced King Milinda. That dialogue is richer, more theatrical, more quotable. It is also derivative. Nagasena himself cites our sister Vajira as his source. The nun said it first. The monk made it famous. Tonight, we set the record straight, but the chariot only takes you so far. It tells you what the self is not. It is not a thing over and above the parts. What it doesn't tell you is why, even after you understand this, the feeling of being someone refuses to leave. For that, we need Kemaka. Kemaka is sick. The text says he is afflicted with a painful illness. We are not told what kind, only that it is severe enough that he cannot travel. SN 22.89. He is staying in the Jujube Tree Park, while the elder monks are at the Eastern Park in Savatha. The elders send a young monk, Dasaka, to check on Kemaka, not about his health, about his understanding. Friend Kemaka, the elders want to know, do you regard anything among the 5 aggregates as self or as belonging to self? Kemaka's answer is immediate. No, friends, I do not regard anything among the 5 aggregates as self or as belonging to self. Dasaka returns with this answer. The elders are satisfied. This sounds like an arahant's understanding. But they ask one more question. Then is the venerable Kemaka an arahant, one whose effluents are ended? Dasaka goes back. Kemaka says, no, friends, I am not an arahant, although I do not regard anything among the 5 aggregates as this I am. Still, the conceit I am has not been overcome in me. Dasaka walks back. The elders send him again with more questions. Back and forth, back and forth. And finally, Kemaka says, enough, I will go to the elders myself. And he does, sick, in pain, making the walk because something needs to be said in person. What he says when he arrives is one of the most extraordinary passages in the entire canon. With regard to the 5 aggregates, I do not assume anything to be self or belonging to self. Yet the conceit I am with regard to the 5 aggregates has not been overcome in me. Although although I do not assume that I am this. SN 22.89. Read that carefully. Khemaka is not confused. He is not making Sati's error. He does not think consciousness is his self. He does not think any aggregate is his self. He has understood the argument completely, the control test, the impermanence chain, the 11-fold conclusion. He would pass any exam on the 5 aggregates. And yet, I am persists, not as a belief, not as a view, as a scent. The image he gives is unforgettable. Just as a lotus scent does not belong to the petals, or to the color, or to the filaments, but the scent pervades the flower, so too, the conceit I am does not belong to form, or to feeling, or to perception, or to fabrications, or to consciousness, but it pervades them all. SN 22.89. A lotus. You hold it in your hand. You smell something beautiful. Where is the scent? In the petals. Cut them. The scent is not there. In the color. Color has no smell. In the filaments, too small to hold fragrance. The scent is nowhere in particular and everywhere at once. It pervades the flower without belonging to any part of it. That is mana, the conceit I am. Not a belief you can correct with an argument, not a view you can abandon by understanding it is wrong. A residue, something subtler than thought, more pervasive than opinion. You have dismantled the chariot. You have seen that no part is self, and still, this faint, persistent sense of being someone lingers over the whole arrangement, like the scent of a flower you cannot locate. Then Khemaka gives the second image, and this one is for anyone who has ever felt frustrated that understanding did not immediately equal freedom. Just as the cloth that is stained, its owners give it to a dyer who dips it in dye. Even though the cloth is now beautifully dyed, its smell of dye has not yet fully gone away. The dyer says, "This cloth is clean, the stain is gone." But the smell of dye remains. It will go away with time. I share SN 22.89. A washed cloth. The dirt is out, really out, not hidden. The fabric is clean, but hold it to your nose and you smell soap. The dirt was the wrong view, ditti, the intellectual belief that I am this body, I am this consciousness, I am this or that aggregate. That wrong view can be washed out at stream entry. You see the argument. You understand it. You no longer believe you are any of the 5 aggregates. But the scent of soap, that preconceptual I am, the mana, does not wash out at stream entry. It fades, slowly, through continued practice. And it is only fully gone at arahantship, the final stage of liberation. Between understanding and freedom, there is a long, honest stretch of practice where you know the truth and still feel otherwise. And the Buddha, through Khemaka, is saying, that is not failure. That is the path. What happened next is the part of this sutta that I find most remarkable. As Khemaka explains this, as he describes the lotus scent, the washed cloth, the difference between seeing through a view and dissolving a conceit, something shifts in the monks who are listening. The text says, while this discourse was being spoken, the minds of approximately 60 monks, through lack of clinging, were released from the effluence, SN 22.89. 60 monks released while listening to a sick man describe his own incomplete liberation. And Khemaka, his mind too, the text says, through lack of clinging, was released from the effluence, SN 22.89. He attained arahantship while teaching, not in spite of his incompleteness, but through the very act of articulating it honestly. The scent faded in the moment of describing the scent. The cloth finished drying in the act of explaining that it was still damp. There is something in this that goes beyond technique. Kamaka's honesty. I understand, and I am not yet free, is itself a form of non-clinging. He is not clinging to the image of himself as liberated. He is not clinging to the frustration of not being liberated. He is simply reporting what is true. And in that simple, bare truthfulness, in the willingness to say, I am not there yet, without adding a second arrow of self-judgment, the last clinging released. If the 5 aggregates are the Buddha's analytical masterpiece, the Khemmaka Sutta is its emotional proof, because it shows that this teaching is not designed to make you feel like a failure for still feeling like a self. It is designed to show you that the feeling is already fading, the moment you stop fighting it and simply see it for what it is, a scent, not a self. And scents, given time and practice, disappear. Closing. Second sermon return. Let us go back to where we started. The deer park, 5 monks, 5 days after the first sermon. They had already heard the diagnosis. They knew suffering existed, that craving caused it, that it could end, and that a path led to its ending. They had the framework. What they did not yet have was the instrument, the way of looking at their own experience that would make the framework operational. And then the Buddha said, look at form. Is it permanent? No. Is it stressful? Yes. Is it fit to be called self? No. Look at feeling. Look at perception. Look at fabrications. Look at consciousness. The same 3 questions 5 times. The same answer 5 times. And at the end of the 5th repetition, through lack of clinging, their minds were released. SN 22.59. What freed them was not information. They had information after the first sermon. What freed them was precision. The ability to look at the very thing they called me and see, with the clarity of someone examining foam on a river, that there was nothing there to cling to. Not nothing at all. Something, 5 processes, each doing its work, each arising from conditions, each passing away, but nothing that deserved the name self. Nothing that warranted the clinging. You have heard the same argument tonight. You are not free, and I would not trust anyone who told you a video could do what the deer park did. But something may have shifted. The next time you catch yourself saying I want, I fear, I am, you might, for half a second, notice the machinery behind the word, the form that is being pushed around, the feeling that tagged the moment before you had a thought, the perception that labeled it, the fabrication that built a story, the consciousness that arose at the point of contact and will cease when the contact changes. That half second of noticing is not liberation, but it is the beginning of what the Buddha was pointing at. It is the moment the foam is recognized as foam, the bubble as bubble, the mirage as mirage, the banana trunk as layers without core, the magic trick as magic trick. Not by rejecting your experience, the foam is still there, the bubble still rises, but by seeing what it is, rather than what you assumed it was. And if you are thinking, I understand this, but I still feel like a self, then you are in exactly the position Khemmaka was in. You have washed the cloth, the dirt is out, the scent of soap remains, and the scent fades, not through more understanding, not through a better argument, but through the kind of sustained, patient, honest looking that Khemmaka himself practiced until the moment it released. Thanisaro Bhikkhu, in his essay 5 Piles of Bricks, offers one last reframe, and it is the one I want to leave you with. He writes that the 5 aggregates are like 5 piles of bricks. When you first encounter them, they are a burden. You are carrying all of them all the time, and you did not know it. The weight of identifying with every sensation every perception, every thought, every flicker of consciousness. It is exhausting, and you did not even realize you were carrying it because you thought the bricks were you. The second stage, you see the bricks clearly. You set them down. They become pavement, a surface you can walk on, a foundation for practice. You are no longer carrying the aggregates. You are using them, using form, feeling, perception, fabrication, consciousness as tools for investigation, rather than as the walls of your identity. The third stage, and this is the one that matters. The bricks become a runway. You have set them down. You have walked on them. And now, having understood what they are and what they are not, the mind lifts off, not into some mystical elsewhere, into the freedom that was always available, obscured only by the insistence that those 5 processes were me. 5 piles of bricks, burden, pavement, runway. The Buddha's second sermon did not add anything to the first. It subtracted something. It subtracted the me that was carrying the diagnosis, and showed the 5 monks that the patient they were trying to heal had never been a patient at all, just 5 processes flowing. And in seeing that clearly, without flinching, without adding a story, without shooting a second arrow, their minds took off. The bricks are in front of you. You have seen what they are. What you do next is between you and the practice.